Married to Medicine. Live discussion Crossing Paths Season 11, Episode 14. Dr. Contessa and Dr. Heavenly sit down and try to bury the past. Quad's hot tub session with King turns chilly, leaving their future uncertain. Dr. Simone and Dr. Cecil are fed up with the boys' messy apartment and demand new rules. After returning from their trip, Toya organizes a Bridgerton-themed dance lesson to bring the group together. But when people fail to show up, Dr. Contessa drops a bombshell, dividing the group in unexpected ways. Married to Medicine. Season 11, Episode 12, The Lemon Squeeze. This week on Married to Medicine, we're back in the thick of the Key West chaos. The episode picks up right where we left off, King and Dr. G being pulled apart from their heated exchange. And yet, despite literally running away from King, Dr. G still can't seem to keep his mouth shut. Cecil and Steve step in, trying to talk some sense into him, reminding him of everything he stands to lose. Meanwhile, Phaedra, Dr. Mimi, and Dr. Contessa attempt to calm Sweet Tea down through prayer. And while the sentiment is there, the optics, absolutely unhinged. Dr. Simone and Toya can't help but side-eye the moment, especially given Phaedra's own explosive showdown with Apollo and his wife, Sherian. The entire trip? A complete disaster. Dr. G and Sweet Tea decide to cut their losses and leave the trip early, while Dr. Simone and Cecil opt to end things on separate boats in hopes of easing the tension. On the main boat, the group splinters into smaller conversations, each unpacking the chaos of the night before. Dr. Jackie shares a moment with King, while Curtis and Dr. Scott have their own discussion. In a surprising turn, Contessa questions Dr. Heavenly about her ongoing issues with Sweet Tea, and for once, even seems to agree. While tea may be sweet, Contessa acknowledges, when she's upset, things can go left quickly. The next morning, the group is still piecing together the wreckage from the night before. Dr. Mimi gets an apology from Contessa for how things unraveled, and Heavenly has a moment with Apollo and Sherian, where Apollo, ever the charmer, issues an apology of his own. But let's be real, Apollo literally went to jail for fraud. Whether or not Phaedra knew Chake was his friend is beside the point. If one of these ladies had knowingly invited her ex-husband just to antagonize her, all bets would have been off. Dr. Jackie checks in on Phaedra, and the two rehash the night's events. Phaedra makes it clear that her biggest disappointment was with Jackie, and honestly, she's not wrong. If nothing else, the way these women have moved only reinforces her infamous, these types of B************* remark. Meanwhile, Simone and Heavenly take it upon themselves to break Phaedra down to Apollo, and at this point, it's exhausting. With friends like these, who needs enemies? Phaedra ultimately decides she's had enough and makes her exit early, and honestly, I had to applaud her. Before leaving, she tells Jackie, "I don't play with these types of mean girls." And I have to pause here, because if an OG Atlanta housewife is saying this, maybe, just maybe, some real introspection is overdue. Jackie brushing it off as just being strong is beyond disappointing. Let someone bring around her husband's mistress and see how that feels. Actually, let's take it a step further. They did the exact same thing to Quad and didn't even blink. As the group regroups, the men head off on their own, while the ladies step away from the resort for some much-needed space. Over drinks, Dr. Simone acknowledges that they completely underestimated the level of tension that would come from being in such close quarters. Go figure. While rehashing the night at a bar, Simone doesn't hold back, calling this trip one of the worst they've ever had. Her biggest disappointment? King and Gregory's fight. Jackie lets the ladies know that Phaedra may not be rejoining the group. And while Toya seems a bit bewildered, Simone remains indifferent, further solidifying the mean girl energy that Phaedra called out. Meanwhile, the men take a breather at a cigar factory, hoping to reset after the chaos. Cecil, ever the peacemaker, wants to bring the group back to neutral ground. Interestingly, as the conversation unfolds, several of the guys begin to see King's perspective. If someone disrespected their partner, wouldn't they step in too? Cecil and Agine check in with Steve about where he stands after witnessing all the drama. While he's not one for the mess, he doesn't mind playing mediator when things get heated. Safe to say, he might just be the voice of reason this group desperately needs. Meanwhile, the couples somehow decide to pile on even more events, including yet another night of couples therapy. On the way, Contessa calls T, and Dr. G is on the phone spinning his version of events, one that, based on the receipts, aka the cameras, doesn't exactly align with reality. And let's talk about the disrespect. Not only does Dr. G call King a boy, but he also makes a point to mention him taking his shirt off. The shade is loud. Back in Atlanta, Gregory and T return from the trip, unpacking how things went down. Gregory is visibly still irritated and embarrassed, and honestly, it's showing unresolved trauma spilling over into his marriage. His claim that if they had stayed, it would have been a fight to the death, wild. Even if it's a metaphor, for someone in his profession, that's a reckless choice of words. T, ever the realist, shuts that down, reminding him and us that she's a combat-trained army vet. It wasn't going to be all of that, but Gregory remains skeptical, and while T might not be my favorite person, the way Dr. G is shifting blame and disrespecting his wife is hard to ignore. And just like he stormed off on Quad in the Mini Cooper, just like he stormed off in Key West, here he is again, walking away from T. And that moment, T and Gregory talking behind a closed door, only further validates everything Quad has ever said about him. The lesson? Believe women the first time. Back in Key West, the couples are getting ready for their final evening together, and Dr. Mimi, ever the insightful resident psychiatrist, comes prepared. She brings a glass vase full of lemons, because it's long overdue for this group to have a much-needed lemon squeeze. And the best part? The vase just so happens to be the one Steve paid for at the Met Gala auction. A full-circle moment for the use of that glass bowl. Simone is deep in her monologue, passionately trying to dispel the idea that this group tears down families and doesn't support marriage, only for her own husband, Cecil, to let out a chuckle. Even he knows that's a reach. Kicking off the lemon squeeze, Simone asks Dr. Mimi about the role of exes in the group. Mimi keeps it real. It all comes down to whether the exes have done the work. Jackie wastes no time making her stance clear. No ex of Curtis should ever be brought around her because, frankly, she couldn't handle it. And then, in a moment of pure honesty, Toya says what everyone is thinking. "We wrong," she admits. "We're conveniently saying we're not mean girls. And I really truly think we need to look in the mirror and say, we do some fed-ups ***. Shout out to production for the playback. These ladies have all crossed lines, thrown shade, and said some truly reckless things. It's about time everyone is held accountable. And honestly, Toya is slowly becoming one of my favorites this season. Heavenly takes the lemons, literally, and owns up to her wrongdoing, acknowledging that she was wrong for not considering Quad's feelings before bringing sweet tea into the group. But honestly, it's baffling how heartless these women can be at times. Moments like this make me question if these friendships aren't even real, or if they're just glorified coworkers playing a role. On the flip side, every episode makes me appreciate King's emotional intelligence even more. He sees through the BS, articulates his feelings well, and always offers solid insight into his perspective. As the episode wraps up, the group is at least attempting to move forward and right their wrongs. The real question is, how long will it last next week? We can look forward to Jackie paying Phaedra a visit to see if they can mend things, but it looks like Phaedra has drawn her line in the sand. Agine and Scott confront Dr. G about a rumor that he called the police on King after their altercation. Meanwhile, Mimi and Toya sit down with T to see where she really stands with the group. Only time will tell who will actually stay in this messy circle of friends.